What happened to Lori Page? Paint a disturbing picture, revealing the lengthy investigation into Lori Page's disappearance and the discovery of her remains.
That we would find who did this, and we would arrest them and bring them to justice.
Nearly 3 months since he's been charged in the death of his 12-year-old daughter, the father of Lori Page is dead.
It's an out in a way, because he's out of it now.
So what happens now? Is the case over? Is this justice denied?
He didn't get a chance to suffer for the crime that he committed.
When there's a case like this and it's so big, people want answers. In our previous podcast, which we'll link below on our description, we discussed in June of 2023, a 12-year-old Lori Page was reported as a runaway. The community rallied around her to try to find out where she was. Days turned into weeks, then months. And then her father, Andrew Wiley, who sometimes participated in the searches, became a suspect in April of this year and was arrested and charged in the homicide of his own daughter. Motive? He may have impregnated his own daughter. In this next clip, the authorities lay out the cause and circumstances.
The Leon County Sheriff's Office announced Andrew Wiley, the father of Lori Page, died of natural causes while in custody at the Leon County Detention Facility. According to the Sheriff's Office, his death was caused by a pulmonary embolism when arteries become blocked by blood clots. Wiley was facing second-degree murder charges in connection to the death of his daughter, 12-year-old Lori Page. Page was reported missing in June 2023. Her remains were found in Thomas County, Georgia in April of this year.
So, Leon County Sheriff's Office puts out a press release. And in the report, the preliminary finding is a pulmonary embolism. That's a blood clot that travels into the lungs. It usually starts from the legs. So, they're classifying this as a death of natural causes. They've noted that the full autopsy will be conducted and released, which is standard procedure in an in-custody death. So, on paper, it's a medical event. No foul play suspected by the authorities. You had in-custody deaths at your jail. How was that handled?
You know, they happen all the time. You know, you're talking about a facility. Well, mine held 1,900 inmates, and sometimes more, depending on if the arrest rate was high. So these things are going to happen. You know, you're going to have natural causes of death, you know, which you try to prevent, of course, is suicides. And you try to prevent murders, which can be prevented. They are preventable, and that's another story for another time. But these things do happen. Anytime a death happens at a jail, of course, there's always going to be that cloud of suspicion. But you can pretty much, those scenes are pretty much easy to reconstruct because you got all these cameras. If it was foul play, you should be able to see someone going into the cell during that particular time with the camera. There's only so many things in there, ways that you can do self-infliction. So it would be pretty easy to tell if it was a suicide or if it was actual murder.
Mm-hmm.
So more than likely, it's just it was just his time.
Right. Well, yeah, it could be his time. I think that part of his time is he's not taking care of himself because he's under so much stress
Absolutely.
with what's going on. You know, so the state prosecutor, Jack Campbell, said that his office believes that a sexual assault may have occurred, and that led to a pregnancy of Lori Page. And they had evidence that he was searching for a Plan B, which is an abortion drug, and an STD kit. Now, his motive is not uncommon, we come to find, and we wish to believe that, you know, it wasn't such dark and sinister, but this follows a predictable pattern.
Yes.
But unfortunately, this is the nature of the beast of dealing with someone who has tremendous guilt and is trying to evade a courtroom of his peers, a jury of his peers, to go ahead and either exonerate or condemn him on that. So,
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So now a lot of people want to know, is it over? You know.
Well, unless we can bring back the dead, what more can be done?
Right. And so the legal matter that we're about to talk about is, for anybody who cares about Lori Page, it's over. The case is abated by death. In the American legal system, a person's rights are included when they have the right to face the accuser and defend themselves. And quite truthfully, it ends when they die. And you can't prosecute a corpse. And I just no two ways about that. All criminal proceedings against Andrew Wiley at this point ceases immediately. They could still leave the case open, but that's only on an administrative level. And of course, they leave the case open to see if anybody else who may have been involved in the case would face prosecution on that end of it. So the indictment is dismissed, unfortunately. And legally speaking, Hill will forever be an accused person, and not convicted. And that's going to royally tick off a lot of people. There is no immunity in this, and particularly in death. And he's just unalive before cross-examination. And this is one of the four unfortunate situations. And brother, I got somebody who asked me, what about absentia? So let me go ahead and clear that up for people who want to talk about that. One of the questions about absentia is this, that it, first of all, I think a lot of people have that misconception. And this is why. Trial in absentia applies to a living defendant. For example, someone who willfully flees. He's going to court and he knows he has a court date, but then he just decides to leave out of Dodge. You would be able to, at that point in time, do a trial by absentia. And then, the other part of this is that it just doesn't apply to somebody who's unalived.
It would be a waste of time and money. I mean, right. Even if you got a guilty verdict, now what? Are you going to incarcerate a corpse? I mean, it doesn't serve a purpose. I mean, if it reached the level of the death penalty case, well, that's happened. It's happened naturally, or depending on your religious beliefs. But perhaps it was ordered by the man above. But I mean, there's nothing more you can do at this point.
Right. So the legal principle of abatement is absolute here. Death, gone. That's just the legal principle. And the case against him is just permanently closed. I know that's going to tick off a lot of people, but that is the case with this. And then let's go ahead and talk about what if we're going to talk about the precursors to conspiracies at this point in time, because I think that is what a lot of people want to know, especially with Epstein. And this is probably one of the psychologies of when there's a case like this and it's so big, people want answers. So, we know that they're frustrated. We know they're angry and deflated because they invested so much hope in the legal process. They wanted to go ahead and hear the evidence. They wanted to understand why. They just wanted to see Wiley face a jury. And now it feels like he took the easy way out, and the community feels cheated out of justice. And they feel that Lori, more importantly, was cheated out of justice too.
Well, let's just play conspiracy theory for a second. If it was a conspiracy, okay, then it would mean it was a murder. Mm-hmm. And if it was a murder, let's back up a second. A medical examiner who had years of experience taught me something very valuable. I was a young homicide detective, and I remember I worked a scene that was pretty interesting. It was a man on a busy highway at a stoplight with his feet on the brake, with a bullet in the back of his head, and the gun was still in there. The passenger door was locked. His door, we can get access there. And it appeared to be a murder. but it's really a suicide. And I remember it after looking at the autopsy, I was talking to the medical examiner. I was like, well, I got to get to work. And he said, get to work on what? I was like, I got to find out who killed this guy. He said, it's a suicide. And I was like, what do you mean it's a suicide? He's shot in the back of the head. He said, you can shoot yourself in the back of the head. And he demonstrated. He said, you just turn your head to the side and you do it. It's consistent. It's a press contact wound. He said, I'm sure when you trace that gun, it's going to come back to him. And, I had a perplexed look on his face. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, son, listen to me. I know it sounds difficult or whatever, but let's look at it the opposite way. If it's a murder, somebody somehow at a busy traffic stop area got into a truck with him, took his gun, shot him in the back of the head, dropped the gun, didn't leave any fingerprints, locked the door, and got out, and nobody saw him despite all the activity. He said, so as weird as that seems that this guy committed suicide, and when we did the psychological autopsy, we couldn't figure out a real motive for it. He said, sometimes people kill themselves and we'll never know. They don't leave a suicide note. He said, I worked plenty of them where we can't find anything that was wrong. Only they know. But he said, what you got to do, you got to look at the exact opposite. So let's look at the situation here. Let's just say it was a conspiracy. Anything's possible. Is it possible? Of course, but is it probable? There's a difference between possible and probable. Okay. That would mean somebody in the jail conspired to kill him. Obviously, they didn't strangle him or they didn't use blunt objects or a gun or anything, or that would be obvious. So that would mean they would have to have some type of advanced poison that can't be detected in a toxicology report or whatever, and that this conspiracy went all the way to the medical examiner's office who's doing the autopsy, who's looking for the cause of death. I don't know if there was I don't believe, it's just not probable that they conspired with the medical examiner, conspired with all the guards. Hey, let's poison this guy and make it look like an actual death. They were probably just as interested in him going to trial and him getting a life sentence and spending the rest of his life in jail as anybody else. If you look at it, depending on what happens after death, which we're not going to get into that, it's an out in a way because he's out of it now. So that's what frustrates everybody, because he didn't get a chance to suffer for the crime that he committed. Of course, we don't know that. We're not going to debate what happens after death. If what we're taught is accurate, then he is suffering.
Correct.
But we got to look at it that particular way. If it was a conspiracy, how logical that is, and how high up would that go? The sheriff, the medical examiner, the guards, and they went and got something that couldn't be detected. Not likely. And if that medical, I believe now they're recording autopsies. If I'm correct, could be. And as they find these findings, they got to photograph and show exactly what they found. And like you said, that type of stuff starts in the leg and works its way up. So if they're actually recording what they found and everything like that, that would be a high conspiracy to come up with that cause of death and cause that to happen. Have there been conspiracies to cover up deaths? Yes, there have.
Mm-hmm.
But not likely in a situation like that. That would take a lot of people on a higher level conspiring to do that when they already had their prize. They actually lost their big day because they were excited about making this arrest. I'm sure they were excited about going to trial. So I think they had every reason to keep him alive.
Correct. And in your scenario with the guy that unalived himself inside the car, that's an easy fix on that one. If you do something like that, then you should have gunshot residue on your arm. And
Absolutely.
That would have given away the situation. Most people have their arms like that. They're not going to get gunshot residue. But if you do it from that point, then you're going to have that.
Right. Now, it was a very small caliber gun. Sometimes that residue is not as prominent or as much as you think in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
With certain guns, it is. But again, that was, I don't think I had been in homicide 3 months when that happened. Right. And, but after a while, there's only 5 ways. Homicide detectives don't work homicides. They look at death scenes, and you got to make a determination because it only can be 1 of 5. It's either a homicide, a suicide, an accidental death, a natural death, and then of course you can get into the realm of the unknown. Sometimes all you find is skeletal remains or so decomposed that some of the evidence that would be there to show a blood clot is not there because the flesh is decomposed to the state where you couldn't tell or not. And you got to make that determination based on not just evidence that the body would show you, but reconstructing the crime scene.
I'm glad you.
Sometimes,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, sometimes it boils down to the one of the basic things, if you got it, is blood patterns. Because a blood pattern can pretty much tell you if it's a homicide or a suicide, because there's going to be certain patterns there if it's self-inflicted, as opposed to if it's being inflicted by another person. But in a situation like in this situation with him, of course, if there was blood, that could tell you something. But unfortunately, in a situation where he murdered his daughter, there wasn't too much left of the remains where you could figure out pregnancy or something like that. Whereas they figured that out because of the inquiries he made after he killed her.
Correct. Now, talking about the manner of death, they were able to determine that she was at least choked.
Okay.
Because as you and I both know, a little small bone right here, when that
Right.
breaks, there's a certain manner in which a certain amount of pressure will break that.
Right,
And-
exactly.
And there's only one way that's going to happen, through a chokehold of some point. That's not to say, and you know this too, that's not to say that she couldn't have been stabbed and she couldn't have been shot. But we'll
Right.
never know because of the way the condition of the body was, and the prescribed burn that was going on at the time when they found her. So you
Right.
have that
There
aspect.
is a small bone that you're right. It begins with an H, and if that's broken, that can indicate choking. There's another thing, but of course the body was in that condition. But we always, anytime I found a body, if the eyes weren't open, I always open it to look in the eyes to see if I could see petechial hemorrhaging.
Exactly.
Exactly, because
you have
that would indicate choking, because you cause the blood vessels to break in the
burst.
eyes. Exactly.
Right. So
Mhm.
these are some of the online theories that is going on out there, because of course somebody has to take the narrative and keep it going, because obviously the timing is always too inconvenient or convenient for folks, right? So the main theory that is that he was silenced, and the reason for that is because someone else was involved in Lori's death, and that someone with power or influence, and this guy was about to go ahead and talk about it. Come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
People come up, that story. By the time a story gets told, there's someone that always makes it more exciting and talk like they're an
Right.
expert. And like I said, possible, yes. Probable, probably not. But
Right.
whoever that person is, they would have to be very well connected to pull something like that, all the way from the sheriff to the medical examiner. And this guy, based on the profile he fits and what little I've seen, it doesn't appear that he would be involved with anybody that powerful anyway. I could be
Right.
wrong, but it just doesn't appear that way.
Right. Then there's a second theory that came up. There's a cover up within the jail itself.
Mhm.
People are questioning this. They were questioning the standard of care, and he was getting. They were saying, "Hey, guess what? He wasn't getting proper medical attention, or he was deliberately neglected." And once this happened, they're just trying to say that other people in the jail offed him, and that of course I think it's hard to come to find out and believe, but this is what happens in most profile, or at least high profile inmate custody deaths, that people, especially when it comes down to natural causes, people aren't going to accept this.
Oh, absolutely. And I can tell you, I was a sheriff 15 years. We were always accused that there was some type of conspiracy inside the jail and whatever. I will say this, though. Sometimes I would hear about things going on in my jail that I found hard to believe. But one thing I would do is always check, because you never can tell. And every now and then, I would get some interesting complaints, and I would say, nah, it can't be. But I would always make a call, go check this. And on 3 occasions, it turned out to be very, very accurate. So you always have to look. But most of this stuff, let's put it this way. You're always looking at everything but possible, but in this case here, we would talk about a high level conspiracy. It would have to go from the sheriff all the way to the medical examiner. I can't imagine anyone this guy would be connected to would have that type of influence, and that they would feel that strongly about that. And then again, you got an autopsy that my understanding is they film them now, and I know they always photographed it.
Mhm.
And you would have to really You're talking about manufacturing evidence. You're manufacturing a condition in the body. Has it ever been done before? I'm sure it has. I mean, whatever, but just not likely. I doubt seriously if that's the case.
Right, right. And here we have and let me go ahead and explain why conspiracies are so bad. We want to go ahead and believe that with major events, there's got to be some major reason or causes that this is happening. And it's our minds really that is trying to hunt for a connection. Some of these patterns that are going on, so we can kind of make sense of it. And it's trying to fit a narrative, and it makes for an interesting story, but something simple, and so we're not trying to listen to any type of contrary facts at all. We're just going to go ahead and believe, what, this is what mostly happens. And this happens time and time and time in our culture. United States culture is just famous for this, and it's just these simple stories, but, people want to feel like they know what's going on,
Right.
that oh no, we're really, we know what's going on, not everybody
Yeah.
else. So you're part of this club.
Yeah, there's a lot of people, they talk like, they want to have something to say, so they talk like they know what they're talking about, even though they don't. And it's just a form of advanced gossiping is what it is. But
Right.
I've seen it on so many things. The thing you got to be careful with, especially if you're in charge of investigations, is you never want to do an investigation based on a theory. There's two terrible investigations where you come up in your mind, this is what happened, and then you try to investigate to prove your theory. You're supposed to just investigate to let the facts fall where they may. And then the other type that's the worst, which I've been the victim of twice, is where you become a target and we just want to find something to pin on you. If we can't find anything, then we're going to create something and make it fit because we want to charge you with something. It's not that we know of any real crime. We just know you're a guy that you want to prosecute. And then that's when you see people, unfortunately, get caught up and charged with things that they didn't do. And we've seen cases like that, with like the Renee Ramsey case.
Right.
And, they got along to a theory that they thought the parents did it. And it turns out they didn't. I mean, years later, the DNA came out and they didn't. And that's why you got to be very, very careful with stuff like that. But
Richard
there's
Jewell?
always Richard Jewell's another one. That's another good example. But I'm telling you, something about that world. Like I said, I was sheriff for 15 years. I remember, I used to ride calls, and sometimes I just happen to be in the area. Someone gets shot or whatever. I'm the closest car. Well, I'm not going to wait aside to let somebody else go face a danger. I'm still the sheriff. And I remember a shooting went out, and a guy had shot his son. And his son got on some bad drugs and was trying to kill his mother. And the father and him fought, and he couldn't get the best of him, so he shot the son in self-defense. Well, I was the first to get on the scene. And, man, by the time the rumors got out, I got there, and I helped rearrange the crime scene to get the father off. But the investigation was handled by a different agency. They reconstructed the scene, what the mother said was on the video. Unfortunately, he got on some bad drugs. He was trying to kill his mother and then tried to kill the father, and the father shot in self-defense. And, it went from me getting there trying to save the young man to see if we could save him long enough to save his life, to hell, I was the one that was moving stuff around so the father wouldn't get a murder charge. I mean, that's just what we're in. And a lot of these gossip stuff is not civilians. Remember, it's not like these people are famous. The first people to arrive on the scene and see me there are cops and rescue. So that rumor must have started there. But I think everyone was just so fascinated that I was the first to pull up and the first to go in. And, it was a situation where, okay, the other people are 5-10 minutes away. I needed to handle it, so I did.
Right. So, you got all these people thinking that they're part of this in group, these,
Exactly.
secret knowledge societies, so they could boost up their self-esteem and their identity. And then what you have is these sensational theories that come out, and the public, kind of assigns to this because people are trying to go ahead and get all types of engagement, particularly online with social media and so on and so forth. But here's the problem. People begin doubting our institutions, and it makes it hard to believe some core truths, and nobody wants to go ahead and have any type of belief in, they have these harmful conspiracies that can endanger people's lives, and they have. What about vaccine rejection, or refusing to do all types of medical care. We just had parents get charged because they convinced their daughter who had cancer not to take cancer drugs.
Right.
And she expired 6 months later. So these are some of the anti-medication theories, conspiracies out here that provoke these type of real world violence. And that's how it was characterized. I mean, no better. QAnon's one of them.
Brother, it's a tangled web, and all we can do is, regardless of how far-fetched it is, I always look into it. People would come to my office with all type of crazy stuff. And I don't want to say crazy because I don't know. I mean, I've had folks come and said, hey, you need to drive down the street. There's some aliens. I just sent a deputy. Who knows? Maybe there might be one. But, it's a tangled web. And all you can do is look into everything and get the facts. Folks are going to always put that around there. There's just nothing you could do. I mean, one day I was surfing the internet and I saw me on the reptilian shapeshifters page. For some reason, somebody thought I was one of them. I can assure you I'm not. I'm not making this up. But there's these conspiracies out here. Are there reptilian shapeshifters? I don't want to get into that. Maybe they are. I don't know. I can tell you I'm not one. But that's the type of stuff that goes on out there. And when you're in public life and you're responsible for a law enforcement agency and you're responsible for a jail, anyone that dies in your jail is going to come under scrutiny. But you got to look into all of it because it could be. I mean, sometimes people say, hey, this is what happened, and it happened. You can never go in there with, nah, it didn't happen. You just got to go in there, but you can't go in there with, yeah, I do believe or I disbelieve. You got to investigate and let the chips fall where it may.
Yeah, that's one. And two, Keith, I swear to God, this autopsy better come up clean, and it better come by the book. Because if you don't have those, they're going to be all over the place, So, you do have those. And it's got to be comprehensive. It's got to be made to the public so people can understand that this is what's going on. Because if you don't do that, you're going to be combating these conspiracy theories for years.
And even if you do, you're going to be combating these conspiracy theories for years. It's the nature of the beast. Damn if you do, damn if you don't.
Right.
It's just part of the job.
It is. And it's always been the ugliest part of the things that we have to do in law enforcement, because you're right. These type of, it takes on a life of its own. And by that time, as you're putting certain cases together, guess what you have to do? Even though you're trying to introduce facts into a trial, you have to go ahead and disprove certain other things that people are saying. And because you're not only dealing with the facts in court, you're dealing with the court of public opinion.
Or you're dealing with prosecutors who want something to happen. There's a fascinating documentary. I can't remember the name of it, but there was some guy, he just started admitting to doing serial killers. So they would say, hey, what about this murder? He would say, yeah, I did. But he wasn't doing none of them. He just liked the attention. He liked the cigarettes and everything. You saw that, right?
Yeah.
And
I did see that.
Exactly. And then when a district attorney actually figured out, hey, this guy's not responsible, it was a sheriff that got mad because he was getting all this publicity because he had this relationship with the so-called serial killer that didn't exist. And he really got mad. And then they did to him what we just saw happen to me. They actually indicted the guy and tried to send him in prison for something that didn't happen, all because he said, hey, this guy didn't really kill the people. And then it turns out the guy didn't kill any of those people. He was only really responsible for one murder, and it was a domestic case where he did kill his mother, but he claimed to kill about 80 or 90 other people that he just never did.
You have those
so
people.
You got those people, and then you got DAs and prosecutors who they want to be someone so bad. We call it the Robert Ford syndrome. They'll make it up.
Now, we got to go ahead and address this real quick. What we are going to say and what we want to go ahead and say is, for children, teenagers out there, the unsettling truth. If you're being in any type of way touched in a way that you're uncomfortable with, you need to talk to somebody. You need to go in and speak to someone. I don't care if it happened at school, you go talk to your parents. If it happened at home, you go ahead and talk to the school. Tell a friend, tell somebody. Do not keep it to yourself.
Absolutely.
And we got to, and furthermore, we got to pivot as a community. It's about her memory. It's about finding a way to honor her life. There are talks of scholarships now, memorials, and advocating for stronger child protection laws in her name. The focus is shifting from punishment now, because the accused is now dead, to remembrance of the vehicle of the victim at this point in time, and that's where we can go ahead and honor Lori Page, and I think that that's the best way we can do it.
Amen.
Yeah. So that'll be all for this show here, but please follow, subscribe, like, comment below, and please, more importantly, just try to keep her family in mind, because obviously we're talking about a very sensitive subject that is somewhat graphic and naturally it's very disturbing for some of the families that see this when we're thinking of the family in this tragic time. So that's all I have for today, and that's all for Good Victor. See your hat on. See my hat. Remember, January 11th, Superman's coming out in theaters near you.
And
I'm
remember
Jerome
your
Hill.
hat and the shirt. I think that shirt tells a story about the hat.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Please follow, subscribe, and like. We'll talk to you later. Until next time.